Jim, we talked about traditions. We went for several places around the globe about different cultures, and now it's time to listen to you and see the way forward. What can you share with us about GameB, about this movement and new ways of looking to the future? So I pass the floor to you, and very curious and excited to know more about GameB. Please.
First, I'm going to say that in 8 minutes, I can't tell the whole GameB story, but I have kind of thought about how I would make a cut through it. So there's much more to be learned. I will also say just a minor correction. You titled it GameB, the way forward. I very carefully titled my talk, A Way Forward. It's very important that we all are in this together, what is loosely called by some folks the liminal web. We're all moving in sort of the same direction, and we should be happy that we have so many fellow travelers on the road to the future. So what is GameB? Most simply, it's an alternative to Game A. Game A is what we can call the status quo social system, at least in my formulation. I track it back to the society that originated in the United Kingdom and the Netherlands around 1700 with the development of limited government, modern science, and the precursors to modern finance. To a greater or lesser degree, it now dominates the world. It's important to acknowledge that Game A accomplished much for humankind. In 1700, half the world's children died by age 5. Most people lived in housing with dirt floors and no glass windows. Slavery and patriarchy were pervasive. Famines were routine. Today, most children grow up. Slavery is almost entirely gone. Patriarchy, while not yet gone, is in rapid retreat, and famine has become rare. Many, many people around the world are living much more varied and interesting lives than our ancestors prior to 1700, though it's always worth remembering that this came at a substantial cost to non-Western people in terms of colonialism and cultural domination. And though while it's accomplished much, Game A has a fundamental problem. It has no brakes. It doesn't know how to stop. In 1700, this didn't matter. In 1700, the world population was about 700 million people, less than a tenth of today's population. Humans were wielding very little energy. In the West in 1700, energy came about 50% from animal power, 25% from wood, 12% from water power, and the final 13 spread among human power, windmills, and sailing ships. It's quite remarkable how small and weak and few in number we were. Today, with more than 10x the population, 8 billion people and counting, each of those consuming more than 10x as much energy per person as we did in 1700. That means our total human race energy consumption rate is 100 times what it was in 1700. And almost all that increase has come from fossil fuels. And it's not just the gross scale, but also the intensity. You know, when you wanted to, build a road across the countryside in 1700, it was people with hoes and shovels. Today, it's bulldozers, dynamite and excavating equipment, chainsaws, sawmills, 1,000 gigawatt power plants, and perhaps most ominously with respect to concentrated energy, the nuclear weapons that arrived on the scene in 1945. So Game A has grown 100x as powerful and wields great and dangerous power. It's the first large-scale social operating system to develop the literal means of its own destruction. So while the lack of brakes, the ability to slow down or stop, didn't matter in 1700, it's of the utmost importance today. Many experts believe we've already exceeded the long-term carrying capacity of the Earth's ecosystems. And not only are we exceeding that carrying capacity today, but many billions of people around the world legitimately desire to share the rich lives of people in the richer countries. And we may well have another 3 billion net new people before population finally levels off and begins to decline around 2100. So how do we square this circle? We're already over the line in terms of what the Earth can tolerate at our current level of technology, and yet we have many billions of people who legitimately want better lives, and we're going to have many more people. The Davos man's answer, my shorthand for the World Economic Forum and such, is to make people reduce their consumption via legislation and finally resort to structural violence. At the end of the day, if you don't follow the legislation, the man with the gun will come around and make you do it. They want to pound people down and force them to reduce their human well-being in GameB terms. It's not going to work. As a very obvious example, the Yellow Jacket movement in France, about a relatively modest increase in taxes on diesel fuel, resulted in almost the paralysis and perhaps the overthrow of a very advanced economy's government. It's the GameB prediction that if we go down the Davos man road of pounding down people's GameB well-being, the result is much more likely to be a populist fascist-style dictatorship around the world. And if we think about the Yellow Jackets and this little increase in fuel price, the reductions that are needed are vast. By analysis I've seen in Europe, we need about a 2/3 reduction in energy and material inputs if our lives are being congruent with Earth's carrying capacity. In the US, Canada, and Australia, it's more like a 75% reduction. So how in the world are you going to get people to go along with that? Sounds like it's impossible. The GameB answer is that we need to create a new way of living that both massively reduces material and energy inputs and significantly increases human well-being. This is a trade we have reason to believe that many people are willing to make. And it isn't all that hard. Human well-being in the commercialized, financialized, and popular cultural infused societies of today is low. We're a society of atomized, attention hijacking, and dopamine reinforcement driven by psychologically insightful marketing. And every year, we're using more and more powerful computers to study our every action and manipulate us constantly. And it's all done in a context of cultivated insecurity. The key error, as we see it, is the destruction of the mesoscale. Meso is a word that means middle. And 150 years ago, most people lived in extended families or in face-to-face communities. And one's sense of self and one's sense of actual embodied security was embedded in these mesoscale communities. These communities are typically in the range of the Dunbar number, it turns out, 150 adults, more or less. Since 1870, extended family and face-to-face mesoscale community has become very much attenuated through urbanization, suburbanization, and its attendant atomization. Everybody living by themselves in nuclear families, or more and more in the rich West by themselves. I read a scary number the other day that more than 50% of the people in Manhattan live by themselves. That's not healthy. Extended family and face-to-face community have been replaced to a very substantial degree by the market and the government. In face-to-face community and extended family, things are live, contextual, and warm, and based on long-term relationships. Instead, they've been replaced with the cold, context-free, and transactional nature of markets and government. So the core of our answer actually is to recreate the mesoscale in what we call proto-Bs, self-organizing and self-governing communities of about 150 adults. Each proto-B can think of itself as a mini society surrounded by a semi-permeable membrane. It's an idea we get from biology, kind of like the walls of a cell. Let some things in, doesn't let other things in. Allows some things out, doesn't allow other things out. And proto-Bs will be focused specifically on human well-being. Anyone who becomes a member of a proto-B will never be homeless. They will never be friendless. There'll be a strong focus on conviviality, the living in the body through shared meals, music, dance, and oh yeah, beer drinking, and more. We expect most proto-Bs to be committed to be excellent places for having and raising children. As I go around talking to people in the GameB community, I would say the strongest angst about GameB is from people who either have young children or are about to. Young mothers today are some of the most isolated and overburdened people in our society. It takes a village to raise a child, as pretty much a cliche, but it's true. And in a proto-B, that will actually be part of our design approach. And of course, for old folks like me, we want it to be a wonderful place to age as part of a broad age range and vibrant community. Work in Proto-Bees will be in part on site, but also via distance work and work in the surrounding communities. But work will not be the paramount activity, as so often is in GameA. Internal work might include growing food, childcare and education, and food service. Distant work can be of many sorts, and while eventually we hope we will achieve enough economic strength via GameB ventures, initially we'd expect some proportion of Proto-Bee residents to work at regular jobs in the wider community. The physical built environment will be designed to allow life within the sustainable levels of energy consumption and material inputs that we talked about earlier, while supporting human well-being. Housing will be very small. We're looking at, say for a couple, 700 square feet. What's that? 70 square meters plus or minus, which at least in the US would be considered poverty level living. But if it's done well, it'll be well designed, built with natural and often beautiful local materials. But there will also be a substantial amount of shared built environment, maker spaces, office rooms, conference rooms, kitchens people can use for entertaining, et cetera, to provide most of the opportunities our consumerist culture, but at a much lower level of per capita ownership of stuff. The Proto-Bees will self-organize at larger scales. Obviously, we can't solve the world's problems at the scale of 150, but we start there and we build up. When we think about membranes and protocols, very much like, again, biology, where signals pass through the membrane and reach other membranes and operate in them. And this allows the Proto-Bees to organize at scale to do bigger projects like Proto-Bee Ventures, which are essentially businesses, with intent to both provision the GameB world and to actually outcompete GameA businesses, at least in some domains. And somebody mentioned this before. I guess it was Hansi Freinacht has said, someone quoted him, that we have to outcompete GameA, at least in some dimensions, if we're going to win. At the same time, as we consciously organize to outcompete GameA, one of the coherent core ideas of GameB is that each decision that is made, especially in business, is made with a serious commitment to make decisions with an omni-win perspective, rather than the win-lose dynamics of so much of GameA. Omni-win is a key concept, sometimes called win-win-win. It's got to include the customers, the employees, the community, and the earth itself all have to win from every decision. What a change that would be from how GameA business is conducted today. Coherent pluralism is a key GameB idea. We expect Proto-Bees to be quite different, each one in their internal and structure and very organic cultures, while adhering to the small coherent list of shared values. We expect to see horizontal communications among Proto-Bees about what works and what doesn't. And this may produce some convergence in culture, or at least clusters of similar Proto-Bees, but then again, it may not. I kind of envision a cloud of Proto-Bees that will be exploring a high-dimensional design space of how to live well at low levels of material inputs. So how do we get to national, continental, and global scale? Einstein was asked, what was the most amazing thing he ever learned about other than relativity? And he said, exponential growth. And if we can start at the bottom and grow exponentially, it doesn't take all that long until you're at significant numbers. There's some research in the complex systems literature which indicates that you could see a switching of trajectories in our society when GameB people amount to somewhere between 3 to 15% of the population, and particularly when the alternative, GameA, is not that good. By my rough calculations, this could take 50 or 60 years. We call this the long road to GameB. Unfortunately, GameA may not hold together that long. So GameB is also prepared to take the short road where our methods will be adopted en masse during a time of crisis. It also means that Proto-Bees must have resilience to survive turbulent times, which we may have ahead. Hence our focus on things like on-site agriculture, energy production, water, etc. In summary, we believe GameB is a realistic way that humankind can get off the GameA accelerating train to disaster. And at the same time, we can actually upgrade human well-being while reducing the physical inputs to life to a sustainable level. much more to say. If you want to find the others, come join us at our website at game-b.org. Thank you.